Welcome to EB Spoke, the podcast. Today's episode, the human element of cybersecurity. Have you heard the saying, humans are the weak link in cybersecurity? Well, that saying's absolutely wrong. Today, we're going to be finding out why humans are a critical link, the key link, and the thing that keeps you the safest. Keep listening to learn more. We're talking today about what I think is a very important topic in cybersecurity, the human element, and how when we're talking to a company, when we're talking about an incident, how do we interact with the people? How do we interact with the employees, families, all those different factors that come into it. And even how do we think about that before an incident, the training, the things that need to happen to make sure that people are prepared. My guest today is Kayla Delcoure, and she's from the company HanaByte. If you're listening to my other radio show with Business Radio X, you heard from Eric Evans at HanaByte. And so she's here today to talk about it from an HR and marketing perspective. And so appreciate you joining me today.
Sure. Yeah. I'm so grateful to be here. As you said, my name is Kayla Delcoure. I am the HR and marketing manager for HanaByte. I've been there almost a year now, a few months shy of a year. And really, I got into kind of this combination of HR and marketing because of a degree in school. But then I found that I liked doing marketing so much that HR is really just marketing to people internally. So I decided, okay, I guess I'll just do both. So when I was freshly out of college, my husband was in the Navy and I couldn't really get a concrete job just because this was before remote work was a thing. And we would move so frequently just getting restationed that it wasn't worth it to get a concrete job. But I did find that I loved helping other military spouses who were a more permanent position. They were more stable and they were ready to get jobs. So I would do resume revisions and basically I would just help them in any way that I could, trying to help them be their best self. So when it was time, my husband got discharged. He got medically discharged and we had two little kids and I didn't know what to do. I felt kind of stuck between this, like, do I want to do marketing? I almost thought about doing like social work, but then HR again felt kind of like a middle ground. So I ended up getting a job for a startup in Atlanta, which brought me here. And yeah, with HanaByte, this whole thing just landed into my lap almost. I'd worked with Eric previously, and he showed up in my inbox one day and was like, hey, I have this position. We're really small. You have the opportunity to do really big things and to help a lot of people. And that's all I needed to hear. I was like, okay, sign me up.
Right. That's
So
amazing. Yeah.
yeah.
And was HanaByte your first exposure to cybersecurity, or was there something before that that kind of piqued your interest with what they're doing?
It was my first exposure to cybersecurity from the consultancy aspect of it. I've always had a little bit of knowledge about it just from, I guess, being a millennial and growing up in the internet era and using LimeWire. We have to learn the hard way sometimes on stuff. I've been around it, but this is the first time where I've really been inside it.
Got it. Yeah. And I think it's a great point, right? Growing up with the internet, you're going to have a different perspective on it than people who were introduced to it later. And I think that's going to tie into a lot of the privacy that we talk about. But first, maybe
Yeah.
let's just kick off the conversation. There's a phrase in cybersecurity world, and it's people are the weakest link in cybersecurity. I will admit here that I actually found a policy I wrote years ago, and that's how I opened up the policy, was with that line. And I'm reviewing it recently. Like, that's a terrible way to think about this, right? Because if that's true, then myself as a cybersecurity leader have probably failed people as opposed to just blaming them and saying, oh, you're the weakest link. We got hacked because you clicked the link. No. Terrible, terrible way, in my opinion, to think about it. I'm just curious, what's your take as you think about cybersecurity from the HR perspective and as a consultancy? What's your take on that phrase?
I think it is a lazy phrase, just really in the sense that you were saying how it's pretty much the biggest umbrella term you can use for humans.
Yeah.
So when you say people are the weakest link, you're like, okay, well, who people? Is it the employees? Is it the cybersecurity training team? And it's not an easy answer. It's not something that you can just blame one thing for. But realistically, what it comes down to is a lack of training and then a lack of physical or online tools like two-factor authentication, physical security keys. It's also people or companies who aren't very familiar with cybersecurity tend to take the more reactive approach. And that is not a healthy way to take cybersecurity.
Right.
So,
Because I think back to why I would have written that years ago, and it was because I was trying to argue for better training, I was trying to solve the problem, encourage leadership to recognize that we need to train people on cybersecurity. And And so I think we fall to that as kind of that cop out of why do we need to train people? Well, because it doesn't matter how many software packages we install. If we don't train our users, we still have a vulnerability. That's true, but it's then wrong to then blame those users as that phrase
Right.
does.
Exactly. And I think it's an important thing. And it says a lot about a company that does use that phrase just because it kind of shifts blame. How are people supposed to know how to catch red flags, how to look at an email domain rather than just who it says it's from? People don't know to do that, especially people that did not grow up in the internet era. They just don't know. These things come natural to some of us because we grew up in it. But to others, like this is not the majority of their life. The majority of their life did not have bad actors everywhere.
Yeah.
So I think it's really on the leadership. And when things fail, it's typically a matter of like frugality and a survivor's bias.
Is there a phrase that you would replace that with?
I'm not sure. And I thought about this and I had a problem thinking of something because it would be such an umbrella phrase, but I don't know. I think maybe like a lack of leadership, maybe, but
Blame the leaders.
I blame the leaders. I mean, I'm a very big believer in top-down support of anything to actually genuinely make a company thrive. If the leader wants to believe something and then they pass it down to all of the other employees, but then the leader demonstrates something else, it's not how it works.
Yes. And I think rather than blame the leaders, right, it's the leaders should take responsibility and own that they are people too. So if people are the weakest link, well, then leaders are people. How do we take responsibility? How do we recognize that? And how do we promote that? I think that gives us a good intro to where take the conversation next. You're in an HR role, you're in a marketing role at a cybersecurity consultancy. What do companies need to be doing for leaders to take responsibility and to make sure that they are enabling their employees, right? Not blaming them, but enabling them. What are some things that you see work well, again, from that HR perspective, but again, also from the cybersecurity consultancy?
So there's a few things. One of the first ones would be training, but not just once a year training. That's what it normally is. A lot of companies will bundle up the cybersecurity training along with the sexual harassment training and all the other things so that it gets lost. It's pretty much when employees take these and there's too much stuff, a haze just comes over and they just dissociate and click through everything, even if it's quizzes in it. And really, the better way that I think it should be done would be almost like a continuous learning, because just like the cybersecurity industry, it's constantly evolving. Hackers are constantly learning new ways to get around things. Even cell phone two-factor authentication used to be top notch, like this is what it is, an email. Well, that's not even safe anymore. Training that is continuous and year round is good. Calling out these attacks elsewhere when they happen, just bringing attention to them, not so much that it evokes fear or worry in employees, but just saying like, hey, this just happened. Here's what we can do to make sure it doesn't happen to us. Because that will actually, rather than instilling blame on your employees, you're giving them the confidence to say, yes, you can keep yourself safe, and that will also be keeping the company safe. So, and then just giving them physical tools. Like when I started at HanaByte, I got 2 different physical keys for two-factor authentication. So again, yes, it's extra money, but it's still going to be cheaper than dealing with the fallout of a security breach. So,
Right, for sure. And I think it's a great point. Give the employees the tools they need to stay safe, give them the training they need to understand how to use the tools and to understand the risks. Training, you mentioned other types of training that HR is traditionally responsible for. And I've heard both sides of this. And I don't have an opinion on where this should fall, but security training came from the cybersecurity or the IT space originally because it was where the need first originated. But I've heard talk about moving that into the regular employee development, the regular HR training functions. Do you have an opinion on should cybersecurity training, and again, I agree, it should be continuous training. Should that be part of HR employee development and other training, or do you think it should remain part of the cybersecurity team's authority, I guess?
I think it should not remain with cybersecurity. I do think it should go to the training and development team, only because if you look at those 2 teams and you ask yourself which one knows how to speak to the employees better in a language that they will understand, it's not going to be the cybersecurity team, probably. If you really use the team that already knows how to create training, hopefully knows how to create training materials that employees understand. And it'll be a team project, basically, because, the training team will need to get all of the materials from cybersecurity. I do think that the actual physical materials and whatever cybersecurity wants to teach the employees or wants to train them on, they need to make that clear. And then the learning team will make it so it's digestible from the employee's perspective.
I definitely get that. And like I said, I don't have a strong opinion, but I do think if a company has a strong learning and development program already, then it's a natural fit, right? And to your
Yeah.
earlier point, if they don't, well, then it may fall back to the cybersecurity team to make sure it does happen, that baseline. But it is just another program that employees need to be trained on and taught. So it doesn't feel like it should be treated differently. We talked a lot about employee communication, both, I think you mentioned if events are happening in the world, creating that awareness that these are types of attacks that you should be paying attention to or looking out for. And as we're thinking about internal communication, when a company does have an incident, whether it's a full-on breach or just an account got attacked, whatever it is, whatever the magnitude of it is, having the communication with your employees, I think, is super critical, but also from a legal and a risk perspective, risky, right? Because you have to decide how much information you can share with your team and also who they can share that with. So are they allowed to tell their family, their friends, colleagues, partners, all the different groups that they may be in touch with? So do you have and I think this even falls back to marketing, right? Because marketing, you're thinking about the external message. What are we
Yep.
telling the public about our breach? But also, how are we communicating it internally, I think is equally important. Help us understand that internal communication in the event of an incident and how you approach it or how you think that messaging should be managed.
Sure. So when there's a breach, in both departments that I work with, just in my career in general, I'm a very big believer in transparency and in honesty. When there is a breach, it's important to not jump the gun first. When I was in school, I took many public relations classes, and one of them was just crisis management. And we would go through these different crises that did happen in the world, but we would basically act out as if it happened again, and then we would come up with a plan. So when there's an attack like this, you need to make sure you have all the facts that you can, and then you basically prioritize those facts as to what information is essential, what information needs to go out to the employees, and what does not. Just in the sense of you don't want to overload employees with too much information that they don't know what's going on. So keeping things simple, keeping them high level, but also making someone available to answer any questions and concerns. And I mean, like, sincerely available. I wouldn't want people coming feeling like they're inconveniencing someone when there's a breach. If you come to me because you're worried about a breach, I'm going to care about you and I'm going to care about that breach and I'm going to help. So, availability of information is important. And then just telling people, like, hey, we are going to the public about X, Y, and Z. If something happened internally, it may not need to be said externally, depending on the variation and the severity of it, I suppose. So it's really a case by case when it comes to those. It's different if like there's customers affected. That's way different. That's a whole different ballgame. But internally, it's so case by case.
I recently heard a story about a company where they were hacked. There was a ransom in place, and the hacking group not only was communicating with the CEO and saying, "Hey, pay the ransom," but then they started to call the family. They started to call employees. They started to call other people in the company. And so I think that's where you have to be ahead of it, because if your child gets a call and the number is spoofed and it says dad and they answer and it's the hacking group and they don't know that anything's happening, that I think is pure panic mode at that point, right? And there's no telling what's
Yeah.
going to happen. Likewise, if they call the help desk and say, "Hey, we hacked your company. Can you talk to the CEO and get them to pay the ransom?" All those sort of things. If you aren't ahead of that, it's going to be bad. What are your thoughts there?
I think every company needs to have some sort of crisis plan, and most companies do. But interestingly enough, the companies that I have worked for where we've had a crisis plan, there was never one where cybersecurity got involved, to my knowledge. So realistically, if a company got hacked, in a perfect world, there would be a red button that someone would press and it would send out communications to the whole company saying, hey, this happened. Again, it goes back to the kind of crisis plan of what information, but this happened. We recommend you lock your credit. Give them the resources
Right.
to lock credit. Don't leave that part out. That's one of those essentials where, yes, this is what you do, and this is what we are doing. So you have to show the company that you're being proactive in even an active, ongoing hack and giving them resources to help themselves defend it and ultimately help the company themselves defend it.
I think that's an interesting point. You don't necessarily know what the breach is, but to be proactive and and be
Yeah.
communicating and saying, we're investigating, but in an abundance of caution, here's some things
Yeah.
that you should do as an individual. Here's some things you should share with your family so they're aware we are investigating. And also, please try not to talk about this beyond that, right?
Yeah.
Have the right and lawful control because you absolutely don't want the wrong information getting out to the public. You want to
Exactly.
you want the correct message going to the public, especially if you're a public company and you are going to have to potentially file with the SEC. Then I think it's an interesting thought to be, what's the right level of proactivity, right? So appreciate that. But I do think, I would bet that most incident or crisis plans also don't mention talking to the family members of the CEO. That's probably not in
Yeah.
most people's playbook.
Yeah, that's new. That's a new one for me. There's a very common scam going around online with social media influencers, and that's a whole other part of me. But basically, I have a following online and I have pages that I own. And there has been this scam where a bad actor reaches out via Facebook Messenger and offers to do a collaboration with the page. And basically, they walk the influencer through giving the bad actor access to the page, and then they hold that page ransom until ransom is paid. So even though the bad actor doesn't get anything without the ransom, they still just hold it indefinitely because why not? And with that, they reach out to family sometimes and try to get family involved because family will be more sympathetic and more like, oh, yes, just do whatever it takes to get it back. Never pay the ransom because they will only ask for more.
Yes. And they may not release the information anyway, or even be able to. That's
Yeah.
the other problem with
Yeah.
ransoms is sometimes they technically can't fix the harm they caused. So I think I want to take the conversation. You mentioned, should employees be proactive about paying attention to their own personal information if a company is breached, or even if not, if they're just out there on social media. So employee privacy is, I think, one of the, I'm not going to say it's forgotten because I hope most companies don't forget it, but it is a treasure trove of data that every company has, right? No matter what your crown jewels are, if you're a credit card company or if you're a finance, your employee data is another set of data that is ripe for stealing because it's a bunch of personal information. So that employee privacy can't be forgotten in your cybersecurity program. Do you see in your, either through HanaByte or through your own HR experience, misses there? Or what are the things that companies should be thinking about to make sure they don't forget to include their employee data?
I think the big one there is file storage. When I was doing my studies to get my HR certification, one of the laws or the rules is that employee files, paper files, have to be kept in a locked container in a locked room. That's where they go. While there are some rules and regulations for keeping information online, it's not as secure. And I think a lot of companies just, I don't know, it might be laziness. It might be, again, they've never had an issue with it before. So why change? But the storage is not top notch. It's not encrypted. It just kind of sits there and nobody thinks about the fact that, oh yeah, HR has the social security numbers and the passport numbers and all of that for every employee at the company. The last company that I worked at did not revoke my access to the HRIS system for 3 months after I left. I was going in one day to look at, I think, my W-2, so from the formal employee side, and it brought me right in to all of the launch codes,
Well,
basically.
yeah. Well, good.
And I'm like, my information's still on here. So like, I didn't feel very secure with that myself. But yes, it's that kind of stuff where if you don't have the proper systems in place, things are going to get missed and you're not going to know that they're missed until something goes wrong. So having systems following them, it's critical.
Yeah. Well, and you said they'll have all this private information for employees, but often for candidates too. Lots of
Yeah.
companies will ask for that same information during the application process, and they may not move forward with, on either side, the person may not become an employee, but you've still got that data. And of course, you've got all that data for former employees as well. So that bundle of information may be a lot bigger than if HR doesn't have sites on recruiting, for example, right? If recruiting's separate, there's another giant load of data that is
Yeah.
vulnerable.
Just like a pile of treasure, basically,
Yeah.
that just sits there and gets forgotten about. And then it's still just vulnerable for any bad actors to come in.
Yep. So I think that is potentially missed by companies as they're developing their cybersecurity program around their business data, to forget their employee data, to forget their candidate data. Any other recommendations that you would say, how's a company fix that? How's a company be, okay, great, we've made them aware that they could be missing it. Is there steps that they should take to, you mentioned identity as well, right? Which is a key thing, but from the HR perspective, what are some other things that they probably should just be proactively doing to get ahead of that?
Again, I would say formalizing systems and even doing penetration testing on it. It doesn't have to be the extreme testing that like HanaByte does as a service, but just being able to see, hey, what information can I access and how difficult is it for me to get to it? And then it goes back to also having the tools to be able to secure things. Don't require multiple complex passwords or just complex passwords in general, and then not give somebody a password manager because they're going to put it to one complex password and they're going to run that for every program they have. Do you have to pay extra for a password manager? Sure. Again, is it cheaper than dealing with the fallout of an attack? Yes.
Enabling the employees to make good cybersecurity decisions. We talked about employee privacy. We talked about what companies need to be doing to protect it. We talked about companies being transparent in the event of a potential incident to make sure that employees are doing what they need to do to protect their privacy. Let's take a step maybe outside of the employment context. Are there personal privacy considerations that you think are also important regardless of the employment scenario?
Yes. And well, I guess it's still kind of like connected with the employment. But basically, when you work anywhere and you sign a handbook, there's typically something in the handbook or in the code of ethics where anything that you type on your computer or on a work owned and managed messaging software, work can access it. It may have steps and hoops to jump through to get to it, but work can access it. And I think people, one, I don't necessarily think everyone is informed of that. I have been in handbook presentations where I wasn't giving one, but they skipped that part. And so you just kind of wonder, what are we trying to hide? And I don't like that. And so typically with something I do is when I have one-on-ones with the current employees at HanaByte, if it ever comes up, I make sure to tell them like, hey, just so you know, your work computer is your work computer. It is not your home computer. It's work. And Slack is work. And even I would warn against Discord. We have a Discord server that is public. So it's like just basically when you're doing anything even remotely related to work, ask yourself if you would be able to safely and confidently defend whatever you say in front of a manager. And that kind of extends to outside of work as well. I feel like it's kind of a millennial saying that what happens on the internet stays on the internet. And that has been proven time and time again with all of these. Someone will become famous and then something from their past will come back to haunt them, even if it's years and years ago. So whenever you put anything online, ask yourself, will I be able to defend this in front of someone I respect? And that typically privacy wise, how I do things.
Makes complete sense. And you got my legal brain ticking too. Anything that you put in that work email could be, you said, would you defend it in front of your manager? Would you also mind reading it in front of a jury? Because anything that's work related can be discoverable and could end up in a trial in the future if your company's ever sued. So are you writing things down that you want to defend your manager? Are you writing things down in email or Slack or a work Discord that you want to read in front of a judge?
But one of the things that I also will tell people is when you're on meetings like this, it doesn't matter what kind of meeting, act like you're being recorded. Don't say anything that you wouldn't want recorded, that you couldn't, defend in front of a judge, basically. That's exactly it.
Yeah. And then going back to the laptop thing, I've been involved with investigations, right, where an employee computer might have been involved with an incident, and now you have to do forensics on it. And so forensics, of course, has to look at the entire computer, all their browser history, all the things that they put on it. So are you doing things with your work computer or a computer you're using for work if you're in a BYOD company that you really don't want managers to know about for any reason, right? It doesn't even have to be bad or illegal. Just you may not want them to know that you're doing certain things.
Yeah.
And so, are you able to hand over that computer to a forensics team, to a law enforcement who may be involved in an investigation? All things that I don't know that the average employee is thinking about as they go check out YouTube, right?
Exactly. And legally, it brings up a very blurry line because you'll get companies where they may provide a work computer, but you may have your own personal phone that you're using with work stuff on it. It's like, where is that line of what work has access to or should have access to, and where do they not?
Exactly. So I think that's a good reminder of that our individual privacy impacts our professional privacy. It's a shared responsibility between our employer to protect our information and ourselves to protect our information online. I want to shift the conversation in the minutes that we have remaining to cybersecurity and marketing, thinking about this not at the individual level, but at the company level now. So if you have a company, you have a cybersecurity program, obviously that's a good thing. You probably want to talk a little bit about that, right? You want the world to know, hey, this is a secure company. Trust us with your data. Come do business with us. And so that becomes a marketing message at that point, right? You can actually take the cybersecurity program that you've put in place, work with marketing to incorporate that into the overall story that you're telling about your business. But at the same time, you can't say too much there either. You can't say, here's exactly the vendors we're using, and here's and here's and here's,
Right.
because the adversary is going to be, oh, well, when we know the weaknesses in all those things. And so now we can target you more efficiently. Thank you.
Mhm.
What's your take on that? How do you balance that? I want to market my business. I want to market the fact that we are a secure business, but also not be too revealing. And I think it's kind of what we've been talking about at the individual level, but now at the company level.
Yeah, I actually think that the amount or level of safety in a company is something that is not used as much as it should be. I think that's one of those things where people without a cybersecurity background don't necessarily think about it. And a lot of times marketing stays in the marketing bubble. So they don't really cross paths that much. But like you said, it is a really useful potential tool to say, hey, yeah, you can trust us. If marketing is all about building a connection with your potential audience and your customers, you want them to feel safe, just like you want your employees to feel safe. So I think when it comes to disclosing how safe, I don't think you need to declare your systems that you use, but even just using data that shows here's how many attacks there were last year, here's how many we had. You can use that as a tool to compare and basically strategically communicate, you can trust us and you should trust us more than others.
I saw that on a cybersecurity software company, and they have a trust page, and they're showing real time, supposedly real time. I have no way of proving it. Metrics of attacks they have thwarted. Basically, it's like, look how many attacks we just got rid of in the last 60 seconds. So,
Yeah, that's actually really cool to have some kind of display of how many emails, phishing emails get reported as phishing and that get thwarted and caught. That's really cool. I was at a company once that did fake fish emails, tests basically. And we had a lot of people fail them sometimes. And yet we still only had security training once a year.
right.
So I don't know.
Get your HR perspective on failing security training. There are companies now, and typically it's post-breach companies, where the third time you fail a security awareness training, a fake phishing attempt, you're fired. And so there's basically a zero tolerance policy on failing phishing attempts. From your HR perspective, what's your reaction to that type of?
If it's 3 times failed and there is significant training between those 3 times, then I mean, absolutely, I would say that is understandable for termination, just because that is a gigantic liability. And if the company is already trying to do their part with offering training and with whatnot, then it's kind of just like carelessness on the employee's part. And if the company puts in the effort and the employee doesn't, then I would understand termination.
Right. So it comes back to, what are they doing to reinforce the correct message in between that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, it's typically post-breach companies that are reactive at that point, because
Exactly.
they've been burned, and now the pendulum has swung to the opposite side. They're doing everything they can to prevent that. Yeah. Just want to get your thoughts on that, because that is a HR policy that comes directly out of that cybersecurity training that we talked about earlier.
I think I have, and this brings us all the way back to the very beginning of our talk, but I think I have an answer for the weakest link in cybersecurity. It's not people, it's survivor's bias. Because for a lot of companies, their cybersecurity practice is fine until it's not.
Right. If it hasn't happened to me, then I must be doing everything correctly, right? Which
Hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. So I know we're getting close on time, and I appreciate taking the time to speak with me today. First, if folks want to learn more about HanaByte, is there a website, or what do they do to get in touch with HanaByte?
Yeah, we have our website, hanabyte.com. We're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. So any of those, just look up HanaByte and
Even Discord, right? You said.
yeah, even Discord. That's right. Yeah. So Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Discord. We actually hold office hours every Friday where our consultants will have a video conference basically in the Discord where anyone from anywhere can join and ask questions and kind of learn more about cybersecurity in general.
Yep. Any parting words of wisdom? Any closing thoughts that you want to share with everybody?
I think the most important thing is just that whole point of don't put anything on your work computer or anything that you wouldn't stand up in front of a judge and defend. Because again, that bias of it won't happen to me, you don't know that.
Right. And I bet that will even translate to a more secure computer at that point, right? Because you probably also pay attention to what I put on the computer.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining me. I know we had a good conversation. It feels like we could have continued this for a lot longer. So maybe we'll have a follow-up in the future. But yeah, again, thank you for joining, and Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me. I really enjoy talking about this whole concept of cybersecurity being present elsewhere.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody, and stay tuned for next time. Thanks for listening to EB Spoke, the podcast. This podcast was produced by Eric Bowmans and features a wide variety of topics. Keep listening for more topics in the future, including cybersecurity, risk, and more.